Hello, this is Dr. Kurt Jarris of Faith Ascent Ministries. I hope that you are having a wonderful holiday season. I know this can be a difficult time for some of us, but there's good news, and the good news of the birth of Jesus and the ministry and the kingdom that he has brought goes so far beyond our trying times this year. And while many of us are going through some difficulties, take heart with the good news. And I'm excited for my friend Ted Wright of Epic Archaeology as he delivers the second part of the Star of Bethlehem.
In our previous video, we were looking at what exactly did the wise men see, the magi, that night that they actually came to worship the Christ child. So in order to discover this, we need to look at some really important historical clues in order to pinpoint that night, and then also what might they have seen in the night sky. So here are the historical clues we're going to look at right now. The majority of the early church fathers placed the birth of Christ during the 41st year of the reign of Octavius Augustus. This would be in 3 or 2 BC. Also, another very important clue in identifying the birth date of Christ is also the death of Herod the Great. And because Herod was alive when Christ was born. A widely popular date for the death of Herod was put forth by a scholar by the name of Emil Schur in his History of the Jewish People, 1897 to 1898. And Emil Schur put forth that date as 4 BC. Many people today, when they read about Herod dying, will usually read about that date, but there are some problems with it. The Jewish historian Josephus in the first century mentions that there was a lunar eclipse shortly before the death of Herod. In his book, The Jewish Wars, and also Antiquities of the Jews, he writes about this. And there's also mention that after he died, the Passover was celebrated afterwards. So with these clues, we can ascertain approximately when this may have happened. So when we look at the proposed date by Emil Schur of 4 BC for the death of Herod, there was a partial lunar eclipse that happened. But then several months later, there was, actually not several months, several weeks later, Herod died after that eclipse. But the problem with that is that Josephus goes on to tell us that there were quite a few things that Herod did after that eclipse. And here I would like to summarize a few of those things. In the last period of Herod's life, between the eclipse, shortly before he died in the Passover, shortly before his death, Josephus narrates several events that took place. Number one, on the night of the eclipse, Herod had 2 rabbis burned alive for the destruction of his golden eagle at the temple gate. Perhaps the rabbis, believing that Herod was going to die, decided to take away this golden eagle because it was sort of sacrilegious. We don't really know. But Herod did have that done, Josephus does tell us. Number two, with his health worsening, Herod traveled from Jericho to the hot baths of Caraho near the northeast end of the Dead Sea because his health was declining. The third thing that Josephus tells us that Herod did before he died is that when the baths proved ineffective, Herod returned to Jericho. Number 4, at Jericho, knowing that his death was imminent and aware that most Jewish people hated him, Herod sent officers to all areas of the kingdom to bring prominent Jewish elders to Jericho, where he had them shut up in the hippodrome with instructions that upon his demise they be executed, so that there would be mourning all throughout Judea at the time of his death. Number 5, Augustus, the Roman emperor, sent Herod a letter giving him permission to either exile or to execute his son Antipater. Herod actually chose the latter. He chose to kill his own son. And then the sixth thing he did, he altered his will, designating Archelaus to have Judea, Samaria, and Idumea, Antipas to be tetrarch of Galilee and Perea, and Philip to be tetrarch of Gauonitis, and also the related regions. 5 days after that, having Antipater killed, Herod died. So with all these things that Josephus tells us, the 4 BC date just doesn't make sense. So that means that all the evidence is overwhelming that Herod very likely died in about 1 BC. So if Herod died in 1 BC, that means that Christ must have been born in 3 or 2 BC. So now with these dates, we can go back to astronomy. We talked about Archaeo-Astronomy, which is this really cool discipline in history and astronomy by using the stars to figure out certain events and when they may have happened, because the sky is a giant clock. And now with using Johannes Kepler's laws of planetary motion, we can now accurately go back in time, sort of like a time machine, and see what the night sky looked like at a particular time. So now that we've established the birth date of Christ as being likely 3 or 2 BC, we can now evaluate those two time periods over the skies of Bethlehem. And what we have discovered is quite remarkable. In that year of 2 BC, it's actually in 2 BC where all the really remarkable astronomical events happen. In 2 BC, there is a triple conjunction of Jupiter, Venus, and Mars, which is just quite remarkable. So perhaps the wise men, they saw that when they were in Babylon, perhaps Persia. We don't exactly know where they came from. The Bible just simply calls them magi. And so some scholars will say it's Babylon, others say Persia. It could be both. I tend to lean toward the Babylonian view, but we can't really be dogmatic about that. But in any case, the stars would have been the same. Another thing that's really interesting is that right over Bethlehem, get this now, according to these Kepler's laws, and I'm not making this up, you can check this out yourself, on December the 25th, 2 BC, a really remarkable event happens. Because when we're reading the Bible, in the book of Matthew, that the wise men came and the star hovered over Bethlehem. Now, how can a star hover? Now, the star was leading them, and then it seemed to stop. And so this is where the astronomy comes in. Jupiter, the planet Jupiter, which looks like a star, it goes into something called retrograde motion, or apparent retrograde motion. It's what astronomers call retrograde motion. What in the world is that? Well, what retrograde motion is that it looks like it's going in the opposite direction. So it really is not changing orbit, but it's because of the way the solar system is rotating. And this only happens once every several thousand years. So at this time, on December the 25th, 2 BC, Jupiter goes into retrograde motion over Bethlehem. And so this is very likely what the wise men saw the night that they came to worship the Christ child. They brought him gold, frankincense, and myrrh, and they bowed down and worshiped him. And then, of course, they were warned in a dream that Herod sought the child's life, and they went down into Egypt, and the wise men went back to their lands. So this is an example of how archaeology and astronomy can work together to show that the biblical writers, and especially in the New Testament, are giving us accurate historical information, telling us about events that are quite marvelous indeed. And of course, the scripture says in Psalm 19, the heavens declare the glory of God. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they display knowledge. And so this is another example of, in a different way, of how the heavens do declare the glory of God.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed this 2-part video series on the Star of Bethlehem. Really intriguing stuff. I'm so glad that Ted's been able to share it with us. If you've enjoyed this content, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, other social media platforms. If you'd like to learn more about the ministry efforts of Faith Ascent, go to faithascent.com. Check out our programs and our resources that we've made available at our website. And if you haven't yet considered, would you please consider giving a year-end contribution to support our ministry efforts at Faith Ascent Ministries? It's an ongoing ministry that has material that's being produced throughout the year, events produced throughout the year, and we'd love to get your support to help teenagers, or our climbers as we call them, and parents, so that they can be confident in their faith as they go into and prepare for the college experience. Please consider going to faithascent.com/donate and begin your support today. God bless you and Merry Christmas.